Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. And I would like to start by introducing our panelists and ask them to say a few words about their area of research and area of expertise, and then we can get the discussion going. We'll start with Susan Hamm.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to our session. I'm with the U.S. Department of Energy, the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, where I am the director of the Integrated Strategies Office, and Integrated Strategies Office has no meaning, right? What is that? So let's back up and talk about what EERE is, again, Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, and that is a major office within the U.S. Department of Energy. We are about $3 billion, and we really focus on R&D for clean energy technologies, everything from solar to vehicles to buildings, et cetera. We invest in clean energy, carbon reduction, and energy efficiency technology development to strengthen the U.S. economy, raise our standard of living, and set us on a path to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. Now, within EERE, Integrated Strategies is technology-neutral, cross-cutting priorities. So the types of portfolios that I oversee, everything from cyber and artificial intelligence to evaluation, strategic analysis, STEM and university partnerships, international, workforce development. So all of those types of things, if they're not technology-specific, often fall under my office. And specifically for today, we have a portfolio called Energy Transitions and Communities. And within Energy Transitions and Communities, we are looking at things like technical assistance for communities, providing DIY resources for communities, direct assistance to communities. And then I'll get into more details as we go through the questions, but gives you a little bit about what I do and what the Department of Energy does in these areas.
And then next is Roderick Jackson.
Yes, thank you, and really excited to be here today on the panel, and thank you for everyone for coming. So I'm Roderick Jackson, and I work at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. So to put that in perspective, so the Department of Energy has about 17 national laboratories that work on anything from the origins of the universe to national security, as well as really focusing on clean energy technology and ensuring that we can achieve the energy transition that we're aiming to achieve. That's the NREL, that's our focus and that's our mission, and we're stewarded by the office that was just articulated on EERE, as Sue mentioned. And so what I do there is I lead our research program on the building technologies research. So if you think about it, buildings, that's where about 75% of our electricity use is consumed in buildings. That's where we are 90% of the time. So as we think about an energy transition, it's really important to ensure that buildings where we work and we live and we sleep and we eat and where we operate are a central part of that. Because importantly, as the panel is titled, it's about people. And if we're thinking about energy, and if we abstract it to an energy or a technology, but we forget about who it's really about, it's not really about the planet, it's not about energy, it's about people. And so really understanding that and centering in the research from the early stage material development to the application in buildings, even more so to the infrastructure as we think about the grid and reliability, when we think about the energy bills, how does it all connect? That's the research that we're leading, and I'm really excited to be able to participate on the panel to talk about that.
Thank you. And next is Rodney Sampson.
Hey, everybody. It's good to be back at Tulane. I'm a 95 graduate of Paul Tulane College. Used to live right behind this building, so it's always a pleasure to come back home. So I have the privilege of serving as the executive chairman and CEO of Opportunity Hub. A little over 11 years ago, my wife and I, she's here with me today, Dr. Shantiria and I, after some success in the tech startup world, started Opportunity Hub sort of to be a platform to ensure that everyone everywhere has equitable access to the future of work, fourth industrial revolution and beyond. And we do that in really 4 different ways. One, I helped shape a lot of policy, particularly innovation policy as a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. I worked on equity crowdfunding, I worked on CHIPS and Science Act, I worked on SSBCI. We have some new reports coming out around building racial equity. That's still a thing, even though the words may not be as popular to articulate today. On the workforce side, we've graduated about 500 people through our software development platform, and we're in the process now of retooling that to launch an AI product school, which we're looking forward to rolling out next year. On the startup side, we have incubated over 500 very, very early stage startups, some at the idea stage, some with the prototypes or the minimum viable products, and really help to get them to a point to either raise capital, get into an accelerator, or go to market. And then the third thing is capital formation. We've invested in over 225 early stage startups so far and about 20 venture funds. We're currently managing a little over $75 million of State Small Business Credit Initiative, SSBCI capital, for the states of North Carolina and Alabama. And what brought us back to New Orleans was actually a federal subaward from the Economic Development Administration, their Build Back Better challenge called H to the Future. And so we created the New Energy Technology Incubator, and every 6 months we run a cohort of startups, particularly from socially and economically disadvantaged backgrounds in new energy, climate tech, hydrogen, AI software. We run them through a climate tech boot camp, and then we down select to 5, and every year we're investing about $300,000 in those companies. Right now, if there's a minority-led climate tech startup in the country, they are probably in our cohort. We know about them, we are tracking them, and we're investing in them as well.
All right. We'll start with some questions to get started, and then we can have the conversation continuing. So let me start with you, Sue.
Sure.
In terms of the federal government is clearly and obviously interested in engaging with communities. How do you actually achieve that, and what kind of programs do you have already in present time, and how successful have you been in terms of an agency? And if you can also elaborate a little bit on what the challenges and the barriers have been.
Sure, happy to. So what the federal government does overall is try to engage with communities and meet communities where they are, right? Historically, there have been some issues, perhaps we could say, with the federal government coming in and being like, we're the government, we're here to help, and not necessarily working with communities as partners, but instead telling communities what the right answers are. And that has really been a learning over the past several decades, and it is something that my team and the folks we are working with really focus on, is making sure that we are listening, right? That when you come into a community, the most important thing is to hear what that community's priorities are, to understand where they are and where they want to go. Because where they want to go may not be where we're thinking they want to go, and that's where you start to get real, that's where you hit a barrier, is if you're not listening and you're bringing up what you think the right answer is. So within DOE, we have a number of programs. Before I get to those, let me talk about some of the work that we do. We tend to work a fair amount with FEMA on emergency response. We work with the EPA on many of their programs. We work with USDA. USDA and EPA both have a lot of rural and remote programs. There are so many of those communities, and DOE doesn't have enough money to really engage with every single community. And so we try to partner with other federal agencies that are already doing work to lend some of the technical expertise that we bring to what they're already doing, right? EPA and USDA don't necessarily focus on the energy issues. And so it's important for us to bring the energy expertise to some of those programs. What we like to do is think strategically about how best to partner with communities, right? We have a number of programs. I want to mention a few of them, but we are especially focused on local and regional organizations and how to build capacity, right? Because what's most important when you think about these types of things is that it's not what the government is going to bring, it's what communities can do for themselves, because that's where the real power is. And so our research has shown that the capacity is needed, individual capacity, organizational capacity, structural capacity, and by structural I mean sort of laws and regulations and those kinds of things, as well as material, right? There's money that is needed. And so some of the examples of technical assistance programs, and you can go to the Department of Energy and just, you can Google Department of Energy technical assistance programs and all of these will show up, as well as many more. There's actually, my office just did an inventory of the technical assistance programs, not even DIY resources, but just our technical assistance programs at the Department of Energy. There were 117 programs, right? They're not all open at all the same times, which is another barrier, right? How do you actually help communities find the right programs at the right times? So there's something called Communities Local Energy Action Program, and that's facilitating disadvantaged communities and making sure that they are getting community-wide benefits through energy deployment. There's Clean Energy to Communities, which is a 3-track program. Actually, NREL does most of the work for us on many of these programs, but especially on C2C, where you can have 40 hours of a national laboratory's time, or you can work in a cohort with a bunch of communities that are looking at the same kind of problem, or you can do something that's very in-depth for multiple months. And so there's 3 different tracks. Our flagship program is something called the Energy Transitions Initiative Partnership Project, and that's actually something that's really important for Louisiana in particular, because that program is really looking to help with energy transition, energy reliability, and resilience for communities that are remote or islanded in some way. And we've actually just engaged with STEM NOLA to be our regional partner here in the Gulf Coast area. And so there are ways for communities to work with STEM NOLA, to work with DOE, to get up to $225,000, $250,000 of technical assistance from the laboratories, as well as $50,000 of direct funding to the community to help support doing that work. And I could go on and on and on, but before I do that, I'm going to let other people talk. We do have something called a Community Energy Innovation Prize. We ran one round of it. It's for communities who want to do something with energy transition, and it's a prize. So you can come in as a community and propose something, and there's 3 tracks as you go on to get more and more engaged with your own ideas of what would help energy transition in your community. And now I'm going to stop talking.
Would you like to elaborate your own views on that question?
I think it was a great answer. I think just because I'm just bubbling with excitement, and so because when you think about it, I think about this as a time. The challenges are significant, right? If we think about even the title of the forum, the energy future, and we think about the challenges we face with extreme events, extreme weather. We're seeing more of these events more often, more frequency, at greater impact, while also we have to deal with our existing infrastructure. And so to have these programs, as Sue mentioned, that are going into the community to identify the challenges that each community has, because if you go to the community on the east side, it's not the same as the community on the west side. And if we don't understand these unique differences and surface them to the table, we apply solutions that were developed for the east and apply them to the west, or for the 9th Ward, and you apply it to somewhere else. It just doesn't work. And historically, unfortunately, the solutions we provided have been kind of baked in one assumption or one kind of area, and then kind of dropped into communities, historically, communities of color, and et cetera. And it's really exciting to kind of see that challenge being really faced head on.
Would you like to add?
Sure. What's really impactful about the work we do is that it's really not charity. We are helping to unlock the ideas and the innovation that entrepreneurs who typically overlooked for a myriad of reasons. And so if you think about the people who are best at solving certain problems, it's going to include people from all different types of intersectional backgrounds and contexts. You know, I'll give you a very kind of local contextual example. Louisiana is losing about a football field of land mass per day. And, you know, I went down this rabbit hole when I was learning more about one of our startup founders who is a software engineer by day. He actually teaches coding. And somehow through LinkedIn and his networking, he was able to license this technology out of the Philippines that was literally rebuilding the coral reef. And, you know, he's right here in the city of New Orleans, but he's connected to the Philippines, and he's tying in data analytics. So he's building the software to also measure the impact of what he's doing. And you may say, oh, wow, that's just, you know, that's cool. But when you look at the startup ecosystem today, venture-backed companies are nearly responsible for all net new jobs in our country. And so when you talk about job creation, when you talk about wealth creation, we're seeing more narrowing of the wealth gap, particularly the racial wealth gap, through venture capital finding its way to startup founders that are outside of the primary geographies of Silicon Valley, New York City, and Boston. My friend Steve Case talks a lot about the rise of the rest. And now you see these startup ecosystems popping up. I mean, a few years ago, I was in Fargo, North Dakota, keynoting an event with 3,000 people at 7 a.m. in the morning that were there to support this, you know, this startup initiative. And so when you think about the existential challenges that we are facing, and they're sort of challenges and opportunities at the same time. When you look at generative artificial intelligence and you think about what does ethics in artificial intelligence look like and how these technologies are being used. I serve on the board of Black and AI and also AI for All. So like I'm literally seeing what a lot of people, I'm living what people overlook. And I think that's what's so exciting about this work. So you think about what's going on in AI, and you think about what's going on in climate technology, and then when you think about what's going on in terms of making sure that, you know, every American has the opportunity to realize and live their dreams. And we're from the context doing the work in the context. And so it's not even work to us. It's just really very, very purposeful and meaningful to see the lives of people change in a meaningful way so that they can take care of their families, provide jobs for other people so they can take care of their families as well, and close that wealth gap in their life.
Before I move on to my next question, just want to check, are there any questions from there are?
Sir, there are. Susan, this is for you. Where can entities find or learn more about the various programs that you mentioned?
If you go to the Department of Energy's website, energy.gov, and do a search on, I'm trying to think, you can generally just do a Google search for community-based programs, place-based programs with the Department of Energy on the energy.gov website. You can email me specifically, susan.hamm@ee.doe.gov, and I'm happy to connect you to any particular program that you're interested in. There is a website which, and I'm blanking on what the exact address is, but that has all of the open programs, everything that's open at the moment, especially in these areas. It may be run through the Office of Community Engagement, but I'm not entirely sure on that. So if you're looking for that, please either email me or just do a Google search on energy.gov, and that's where you'll find our programs. I'm sorry? Sure, Susan, S-U-S-A-N, .Hamm, H-A-M as in Mary, M as in Mary, at elephant.doe, Department of Energy.gov. And I do read every email I get. As Roderick can attest, because it just took me an hour to get through my emails from this morning. But it's all good. It's all good. I love hearing from people, and we really see our role as making sure that communities and individuals are connected with the programs that are going to do them the most good. One of the ways that the Department of Energy engages with communities is through regional partners. I mentioned STEM NOLA is one of our partners here in New Orleans, representing the Gulf Coast, but we have regional partners throughout. We have one in Alaska, one in Hawaii, Maine, et cetera. And we're also starting a new program called the EERE Regional Navigators. And if you think about, if any of you have kids or you recently went through high school, you remember your junior or senior year, you sit down with the college counselor, right? And that college counselor looks at your grades, looks at your interests, looks at the schools and says, oh, you should be thinking about this, 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 and this. And our idea of the regional navigators is that a community can come to their regional navigator who will understand their context, right? I'm sitting inside the Beltway in DC. I don't know the context of every community in the United States, but the regional navigators are going to. Our regional partners already do. And the idea there with the regional navigators is they're going to be the ones who say, oh, you're a community and you are concerned about X, Y, and Z when it comes to energy. Here are the programs you should be looking at, and this is when they're going to open up. And this is also how you can be ready to apply for those programs, right? One of the big problems is that not every community is ready to apply for each type of program at the Department of Energy. And let's be honest, has anyone applied for federal funding before? It's a pain in the, right? Now, we do a lot of things to try to make it easier. We've started new mechanisms, like our prizes are much easier. Applying for our ETIP program, that's the ETI partnership projects that I already talked about. Those are easier applications, but they're also a little less money. If you want the big bucks, you're gonna have to suck it up and apply for these big projects, these big proposals. And you may need some help. And the regional navigators, the regional partners, are designed to help communities get to where they need to get to in order to be ready to apply for, accept, and then implement federal funding.
Susan, can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
Is there a sense of urgency in your department to deploy capital between now and January, or do you think things will just be status quo and continue forward?
So the president proposes and Congress disposes, right? And so what we're waiting for right now is the FY25 appropriations process. We're under continuing resolution, right? Sure. And so we are, because of the way that government funding works, we're under a smaller amount of money, right? When you're in a continuing resolution, you're given only X% of a total year budget. Right. And so we are working to spend that money by the end of the first quarter.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. I have a question for you, Roderick. To maximize the scale and benefit of energy transition solutions, how should we approach research and development? And how do we make sure that the work is centering people and communities?
So I'm going to, since I'm in New Orleans and improvisation, jazz, and riffing is kind of what's done here, I'm going to riff off a couple comments. So context was mentioned twice, right, or multiple times, context. And I think what we can do is, as we think about R&D, a lot of times we think about R&D as basically kind of the science and equations and engineering, but really R&D without context really lacks the ability to have maximum impact. So I'll use the AI example. There's been a lot of work or a lot of study and understanding on bias in AI, particularly as you look into kind of the medical field or judicial processes. But if we think about the clean energy transition or the energy transition, AI is baked into every facet of that. Digitalization of energy is going to require AI to process that data. So now the question is, if we know bias exists in other fields where we've applied AI, what happens in the clean energy? Who's asking that question? And if we don't have researchers who are willing, who have context and say, you know what? My neighborhood didn't look like the neighborhood that we're basing our AI on. Or the store that I go to, the convenience store, is the only, there's no grocery store, so everyone who goes to shop in or stops at this convenience store actually, they spend a little bit more time there. So if I use AI principles based on a convenience store where there's a Whole Foods down the street, then maybe it won't be as applicable. And if we don't have those questions and then bake into what are the actual algorithms, not just the data that goes in, or the algorithms. And so those are some of the things that we're able to say, well, let's take all this information that we're seeing, contextualize in communities, and now let's go back and actually revisit the very equations and algorithms and data that we use for these AI algorithms that utilities and entrepreneurs and everybody will be using as a national laboratory. It's in the best interest of the country that we be able to investigate these so that we can reduce these biases. Because we don't want to be on the news like you see judicial processes and you see AI everywhere else. We want our energy, for the energy future to be people-centered, it needs to think about these things up front. And so that's an example of really making sure that we're centering people. And then kind of at a high level, look, and the reason why this is important is because historically, as we've looked at the energy transition or the energy future, we've talked about it in terms of technology. Or now we talk about it in terms of emissions. But really making sure that we talk about it in terms of people, and now that context matters. Because emissions, it gets in the air, it comes from this neighborhood or that neighborhood, it really, what's the difference? People from this neighborhood and that neighborhood, the building, the streets are different. Some neighborhoods have the power lines where you can see them, others have the power lines down underground. What is the impact of how the buildings interact with the grid when there's a storm, when there's a heat wave? Having that people-centered focus requires you to contextualize the actual research so that now we have research and outcomes that's unique for each application. And so as we apply it, we actually get solutions that work not just for that neighborhood and halfway for this neighborhood, but it actually works in that neighborhood and that neighborhood. So that's an example.
Thank you. Let me check again. Questions, please?
Yes, we do. What focus should be placed on reducing energy consumption as opposed to innovation and implementation of energy transition to renewables? Is simply shifting energy resources instead of reducing overall consumption problematic in your view?
I'll jump in really quick and say, you know, the least disruptive energy, the cheapest energy, and the best energy for the environment is the energy you never use, right? And so energy efficiency and energy efficiency technologies are something that my office, EERE, takes very seriously. And you know, as you're scrolling through and you're using AI, think about the data centers, right? The data centers that are just gobbling up energy unbelievably. And the big companies are really starting to think about how are they going to power the AI data centers? What are ways to cool data centers that are, for example, I think it was Amazon or Facebook, they're putting in a lot of geothermal heating and cooling, right, which is emissions-free, and it's a great way to start to cool some of these big data centers. But energy efficiency technology is incredibly important, right? It's going to take advancing on all of these fronts. It's going to take changing to renewable energies in addition to our fossil fuels that we're already using. It's going to take looking at all of our buildings. It's going to take looking at the grid edge, which is where users interface with the grid. So if you think about if you've got an electric vehicle and you're plugging it in at night, you know, you want to be able to take the energy into your car, but also if you're not using the energy, your car can become part of what makes the grid more stable and give energy back to the grid. And so all of these technologies are critically important. It's not one or the other. And there's not a particular, in my mind personally, I don't think there is a particular prioritization for any one of them. They're all important.
And just to add to that, I second that. We should be looking at all the options on the table. Because we should be asking the question, okay, when was the last time that my power went out? Why did it have to go out? How can reducing the energy in my home or in my business actually lower the cost to make my power more reliable? That's a question that we're probably not asking, but if we ask that question, now it actually, the value proposition of efficiency now is increased because you're not only saving money on your energy bills, but you're also saving money on your ability to have reliable and resilient power. That's kind of where I get excited about this kind of new space. How do we, yes, let's keep doing efficiency, but let's efficiency plus, where it's adding value across the table.
Let me ask a question to all of you. Maybe I will start with you, Rodney. In terms of the role of education, from your perspective, what should we do here at Tulane? What should we focus on in terms of educating the new generation in that field, related energy-related fields? That goes to the School of Business, School of Science and Engineering, liberal arts, public health. We're all policy, law school. So each one of our schools is involved from a different perspective. Are there any advices from you in terms of how should we prepare our next generation so that they can be more effectively involved in the workforce?
Absolutely. Early exposure is key. And just, sitting in this venue in the B school, classes are going on. I see undergraduate and graduate students walking by, and some of them are tuning in. And the proximity to opportunity is just important as the opportunity itself. And so encouraging students to attend these type of forums are very important. I also think it's very important to teach, we give it a fancy word, right? We call it, innovation. Real fancy word that no one really understands, right? But the ability to develop conviction around a problem that you want to solve. And perhaps, once there's an identification of that problem, then you could talk about the productization of that, and then the commercialization, and then the monetization process. That process should be taught at the undergraduate level. There's a program in 2016 my wife and I started called HBCU at South by Southwest. How many of you have heard of the South by Southwest Interactive Conference? So there's music, there's film, and there's interactive. Companies like Twitter were launched, at major tech companies that are really huge before they got weird, were launched at South by Southwest, right? And so between 2015 and 2020, we took about 500 students there. And then we went virtual in 2020. We took 1,000 through the virtual experience. That long weekend, 5 days and 4 nights, where they were literally rubbing shoulders all day and all night with industry. And what we realized was that they were starting to get invited to interview for internships. And it became a career development it evolved into a career development program. We'll travel this country and we'll run into some of the alums, some of the scholars that went through that program. And they'll say, today I work at an AI startup. Today I am in venture capital. Today I'm pursuing a master's in some advanced technology or a PhD. But it was because that early exposure, and it didn't have to be super formal, right? That early exposure is very, very key. Before they've made up their minds that they want to participate in the status quo of the American dream, they still have the opportunity to create that American dream. And so the earlier that we can expose them, I heard STEM NOLA come up a few times. Even if you go earlier in the work that Calvin Mackey is doing, really allowing children to tinker. That's something that we did in our home. You know, our younger children, one is now at Google as a software developer in Seattle, and another one is working on her PhD at the University of Pennsylvania. They had computers really before they could write. And they tore up the keys and, you know, they spilt stuff on them. But being able to tinker without correction was an incredible environment to expose young children in. And we have to be mindful that everyone may not have that privilege to grow up in that environment. So when they go to school, it's important that our teachers are retaught to teach in an innovative way. When they get to undergraduate, we should allow for those type of experiences. If you look at the schools like Georgia Tech, they have ATDC. Another colleague of mine, Chris Kloss, he started Internet Security Systems, ISS, sold it for $1 billion. He set up this program at Georgia Tech where you take an entrepreneurship class, a startup entrepreneurship class, you get credit for it. So incentivizing the learning in this context is very important. If they graduate from the class, or they successfully matriculate from the class, they can then apply to the Create X program where they can apply for a $20,000 to $50,000 investment as students into their startup idea. Most of them fail, but they go on to do very great things. And so those are the types of things that I would really, really, encourage. We saw a lot of this come out of the Atlanta University Center leading up to the pandemic. I was a professor of the practice at Morehouse College at the time. And Opportunity Hub sponsored the startup lab in the business school where the students could just come and hang out. And we would have different mentors. They didn't even know what a venture capitalist was, right? A VC would come, or some tech founder would come, or some software developer would come. Some of the students changed their major after hearing these people speak or interacting with them. And so building a tech hub on the campus at whatever scale, and you all are doing some great work, right? The work of Rob Local, my friend here, he's got a new book out, The Venture Alchemist. I gave him an endorsement for that book, but they have a minor of entrepreneurship, right? So they're literally embedding innovation, entrepreneurship, and investment, and they're going deeper in climate tech, new energy, artificial intelligence, machine learning, quantum computing, blockchain, you name it. They're being exposed very early, and I think that's what's making the difference. We now have to figure out how to make that difference in the life of every child in America and every undergraduate student in America. And that's a big vision. Maybe we'll get to that in 100 years, but.
Just want to check for questions.
Unfortunately, I think we're out of time for questions, but open to any closing remarks.
So maybe we can have closing remarks one by one, please.
Well, I'll just kind of follow up on closing. I think the challenges of an energy future are no longer singular in perspective. They really require integrated perspective. I think bringing to the table the business minds with the engineering minds, with the science minds, with the social science minds, to be able to look at the problem bigger than we have before. Because unfortunately, we've kind of minimized the complexity of the problem to a simplistic form that we could solve. And it allowed us to solve it, but it didn't mean that it was applicable to all the communities that we needed. In order to break that up, we need multiple diverse perspectives at the table that maybe the social scientists can say that community has a different way of adopting technologies, and so we need to understand that in how we develop the technology so that it will resonate in that community versus that community. And then that business person can say, well, this is the business models that would resonate upon that type of interactions. And the engineer can then design, and science can build the science around that. These are the things that I think Tulane or other universities, or really broadly thinking, kind of just to double down on how do we think differently about the problem if we really want to achieve the goals.
Everyone said what I would have said. I would just add that partnerships are so key, right? None of us can do it alone. Universities can't do it alone. Industry can't do it alone. Government can't do it alone. It's going to take partnerships of all of us to get to an energy transition. And I'm thrilled that everyone was here today to listen to some of these ideas and to talk about place-based energy transition, because that's really where the future is.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. And